Today I see that we have the word creativity in the title of our conference. I wanted to start with a scientific experiment, so everyone has to participate. So I'll make sure the translation works. I'm going to ask you a question, and you have to answer the question using two hands, and don't do it until I say go. And the answer will be a number between 0 and 10. This is 0, this is 10. And the question is, remember when you were 5 years old in kindergarten, and think about how much art you did, drawing, painting, in kindergarten. How much of an artist were you? This is, I didn't do any painting or drawing. This is, I was Picasso, okay? There's no drawing, no painting. This is, I was Picasso. Ready? Go. How many? Everybody put your hands up. Okay, so some people didn't put up. I see a lot of 10s, a lot of 8s. I think the average is around 8, okay? So second question, now think today. How much art do you do? Painting, drawing. How much of an artist are you today, right now? Ready? Go. All right. There's a few 10s, but mostly now 0s. Maybe average is about 4, okay? So my question is, what happened between when you were 5 years old till today that you no longer draw or paint? And it's not perfect, but I think painting and drawing is a good proxy for creativity. David and Tom Kelly use the phrase creative confidence. This is the confidence, the permission that you give to yourself to be creative. And I think in the post-industrial mass production society that we've had, creativity wasn't the best thing that you needed in order to be successful in life. In life, people will tell you you had to be disciplined, be focused, be predictable, show up on time, listen to your superiors. And it's important when you have lots of people that have to do the same thing, that they're organized, not so creative, and obedient. But as we have more computers and more robots and more things that are good at doing those repetitive things, I think that in this new generation of ICT, creativity is exceedingly important. But somehow we have designed our educational system and our businesses to kill creativity and reinforce obedience. And I think some people, you can't have everyone being completely creative, but I think we are skewing and really destroying a lot of creativity that we need in society today. So kind of put that in your head and think about it as we discuss this section. So I think of my life. How many people remember before there was internet? I want to see how young this audience is. Okay. I see some people who probably remember but didn't raise their hand. But I think most of us, except for the very young people, remember BI, before internet. Okay? BI, life was simple. Economists were often correct in predicting the future. Businesses like newspapers, I'm on the board of the New York Times, used to be great businesses. And the world was, we could follow general rules and things kind of worked in a way that you could learn your business and continue and repeat the business. But suddenly the internet happened. And after internet, these rules, I use a physics metaphor, Newtonian laws, where you have like things that happen predictably, suddenly became unpredictable. And many of the things that happen, good things and bad things, are completely unpredictable. And there's so much speed and so much chaos. We call this the Great Disruption. Many of our businesses have been greatly disruptive, and more businesses are becoming disrupted. And this after-internet age, I think we have to have a fundamentally different way of approaching the way we think. I think it's kind of a new evolution of man. Okay, this is an artist friend of mine describing what he thinks the evolution of man looks like. But I think it's a little different than this. This looks like engineering. And a lot of science and technology has been about trying to control nature and to beat nature and be under control. But we learned from the internet that life is out of control, and it looks a lot more like this. And this is nature. So I think in the past, science and technology, ICT, has been about trying to make things more efficient and control nature to get local gain at the expense of the system. But in fact, in the future, I think what we need to do is empower nature to help us, to try to help our systems become more natural, and to think about natural systems as a design practice rather than trying to beat nature. And this is a bigger idea that we can talk about later if we're interested. But I think it's not that simple. The other thing that we have to remember, these are kids. They grew up and all they can remember is internet. Now your kids probably have mobile phones and maybe not necessarily computers, but their brains are different. Okay, and so we're sitting here talking about policy for kids whose brains are completely different than ours. It doesn't make sense. So we have to design a system that's going to be used with kids who have a completely different cognitive model than we do. And that's challenging, but it has to be very dynamic. This is a classroom. I'm a university administrator. Can you tell if this was last year, 20 years ago, or 100 years ago? You can't tell the difference, because we have been lecturing and teaching kids in exactly the same way for hundreds of years. It's kind of like if you go to university and then you go to work, it's kind of like forcing somebody to read the encyclopedia from beginning to end before they can do anything. This is the old way of education. You educate first, work later. This is a sensor from our lab, and this measures your galvanic skin response. This is the electrical conductivity of your skin. And this measures basically your brain activity. So we put this on students at MIT, and I don't know if you can see this graph, but if you look carefully, you see like study and homework, lots of brain activity. And you see in the right, it says class, it's flat, no brain activity. Actually, you get more brain activity during sleep than in class. So I don't know, maybe this is a new thing, maybe it's an old thing, but obviously this lecture is not working if your brain isn't moving when you're supposed to be learning. So something's wrong with our method of learning, and I think this is something we also have to think about. So I talk about the principles of AI, principles of after internet, and we can go through some of these if we have time, but we have to think about how we change the way we do things rather than just create new rules. This is my bathroom in the early 90s. I put it there because this stuff there because it had good ventilation. This is also the first commercial internet service provider in Japan, and it cost a few $1,000s to put together. If it were a phone company, it would have cost millions of dollars. But because of hackers and entrepreneurs like me, we were able to build a very, very low-cost communication network because the protocols were open and simple, and we had permission to innovate without anyone telling us that what we could and couldn't do. And one thing, this innovation we can talk about, but what was really important is it drove the cost of communication down nearly to zero because of unrestricted competition and collaboration. And so what this did was it lowered the cost of distribution and the cost of collaboration so much that it fundamentally changed the nature of innovation. There's also Moore's law, which I'm sure you know, which is the idea that the cost of computing goes down by half every 18 months. So if you add together the fact that computers getting cheaper, you can put the whole, in one of your mobile phone, your Samsung phones, you can put all of the computers used to launch the first moon shot from Houston, you can fit in a phone. So you put the low cost of computing, the low cost of networking, the low cost of distribution, and throw in the fact that most of the stuff is now open source software, you get low cost of innovation. And what does low cost of innovation mean? It means fundamentally different modes. So in the old days, when you wanted to set up a content system like Minitel, you had to build the network and the hardware and the software and the content. It would cost millions, if not billions of dollars to put together something that looked like the World Wide Web before we had open source and internet. And so what you did was you had the business guy coming up with the business plan and then raising the money inside of a big company or outside funding, and then you'd hire the engineers and they'd build the thing. But when the cost of innovation becomes nearly zero, like Yahoo, Google, Facebook, so think about Google. You have Larry and Sergey at Stanford. They buy a PC, install Linux, install all this open source software. So they only have to write a little bit of code, connect it to the internet, and I was running InfoSeek at the time, part of InfoSeek Japan, and they killed us. And they didn't have to spend any money to build the product. They eventually raised, I think, $50 million from Sequoia and Kleiner before they even had a business plan. So then they eventually built a business plan. So you have back here, you have the MBA and the money guy and the engineer. Here you have the engineer, the money guy, and the MBA, right? So it used to be plan first, build last. Now it's build first, plan last. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking. And also, these kids, Yahoo